the majority of my work with the Wabash Center has been with doctoral students. So I've tried to keep in mind what I've learned from them as I prepared these remarks. So I thought I would just give you, a little bit of the history of the different positions I've held, describe to you more about the Wabash Center and what I do for them, what are, as they say, the transferable skills from my preparation in doctoral studies and being a professor for many years. But more than anything, I guess I am wanting to beat the drum of there are all sorts of paths out there. And to me, the challenge is what best fits your gifts, your lives, with all of its demands and constraints. And there's ways to make it work that are deeply satisfying on many, many levels. And trying to help doctoral students get out of their heads the voices that I know were certainly in mine of certain expectations of, well, if you get a doctorate in one of these type fields in the humanities, there's only one way to go. And that's just not true, especially not now, but I don't think it ever was. In fact, there's a great book, The Graduate School Mess, How We Got Here and How to Fix It. Highly recommend it. And Leon Cassuto talks a lot about, originally the PhDs as we know them, the way they've developed in the United States, were meant really to develop people to be public intellectuals and to be in business and to be in government. And I feel like we're starting to go back to that. There was a brief period after World War II where it did seem like the one path was into the professorate, into the academy. To me, there's something freeing about realizing you can do a lot more with the training that you've had. So as Mary said, we were talking a little earlier about requirements in undergraduate world. I had gone to Georgetown undergrad, majored in theology, and then went to the University of Chicago Divinity School and did my master's and PhD there. And while I was finishing up, I was doing quite a bit of adjunct teaching. Since it was Chicago, there's lots of schools in the area that are always looking for teachers. And I loved it. I really loved being in the classroom and working with the students. It drove my advisor nuts because obviously that slowed me down. And at that time, getting a job, oh my God, it was so easy compared to now because all people were looking for was, are you pretty close to being done with your dissertation? There was no expectation of publications, of papers. And actually at that time, I think teaching was kind of like, oh, you teach? Why do you want to do that? So as I said, there was some tension I already felt with my own committee that I really felt drawn to teaching, but that was why I'd gone into the field to begin with, was I had so enjoyed my time at Georgetown and the work with my professors at the undergraduate level. So as I was finishing up, I kind of honestly stumbled into a visiting position at Dominican University, which is outside Chicago. It's a very small liberal arts Catholic college. And it ultimately turned into a full-time position. And I loved it. And we would teach 3-3 or 3-4 loads. It was a lot of first-generation students. I liked working with them. I liked teaching the intro courses where 99% of the kids there did not want to be there. So there's something perverse about me that I enjoyed that challenge and getting them to see that the topics of conversation were ones that they were actually already engaged in. While I was at Dominican, my then husband and I started building our family through adoption, and as each kid came home, I kept shifting from, with my first 2 kids, I went down to part-time, and there again, I would encourage you. I had a sociology professor who said, write a proposal. You propose to the university, you keep me on at half salary and half benefits, and I will do for you this amount of teaching, this amount of advising, this amount of committee work. She really helped me envision, and they accepted it. So sometimes you can, after you've been at a place, mold a position that works with whatever your life is at that time. So I was part-time for a couple years, and then with the 3rd kid, went to adjunct And by the fourth, I was like, I'm done for a while. So then I was home full time, but I tried to keep active I did some writing projects for anthologies. I did a lot of public speaking around Chicago, either through the Archdiocese or through universities, because my goal was to have something current on my resume, anticipating that eventually, as the kids got older, I'd want to step it back up into the job market. And just as I hit that point that I was ready, I had just started adjuncting again with Dominican, with the thought of going back to a part-time status. We got transferred to Atlanta for the snowpocalypse. We brought it with us. And there I realized there were not a lot of schools in the area to do adjunct teaching, and certainly not in my area, which was Christian systematics, Catholic theology. And I also realized I was not willing to spend more on childcare in order to work than what I was making working. So I ended up working with at-risk high school students in the area. And in many ways, that has been, I almost feel like my missed calling. And I think ahead to when I retire, I would very much like to do that again, even if it was on a volunteer level. I loved working. I called them my kids. It drove my kids nuts. But I knew if they weren't in the classroom, they were in suspension, and I could go retrieve them. But the satisfaction of seeing them finish high school was just enormous. And their lives, as you can imagine, had so many challenges, but to be able to be their advocate in that building and connect them with some of the resources was really one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And it did feel, from a theological standpoint, it had a very ministerial feel to it, even though it was in a public high school. Plus, how many jobs do you get to go to school for pajama day, dress-up day, all that kind of, you don't get that at the college level. So I did enjoy that. Then, and there's a great line by the writer and poet Wendell Berry, we live the given life and not the planned. And I've usually kept that by a door that I have to pass in and out of my house to remind myself of this, that it was kind of by necessity, going through a divorce, having 4 kids, not having enough salary from the high school job, that led me to look at moving back to Chicago. And ended up being able to do that through a job that I was connected with through a friend who knew someone. So it is true that definitely, probably to a large extent still in academia, but outside academia, networking has very much been the name of the game of how I've ended up into different positions. That was how I got the high school job. I had been at some meeting and the principal was talking about such and such need, and another mom who'd met me said, you know, I met this woman recently and she's taught for 20 years, she has a PhD, maybe she'd be willing to take, she's dealt with 4 kids, she can deal with a room full. So anyway, moved back through this other job that ended up not being a good fit because the boss was completely crazy. It made for some good stories, but that I want to come back to. Why she hired me was because from this business perspective she had, and hers was warped in many, many ways, the PhD was just so appealing. She loved being able to put those 3 little letters behind my names. You are in a world where everybody you're interacting with has or is getting a PhD. It's really a rare credential in society. And people, to my mind, give it a lot more prestige and credence than it sometimes warrants. But it carries a weight that you can use to market yourself into all sorts of different arenas. And like I said, every job I've had, Wabash, it makes sense because we're still working in the academic field. But this first position and the high school position, you didn't need to have a doctorate for that, but they loved having that all over the place, which I always feel a little uneasy about. But so that job, I realized very quickly, was not a good fit for many reasons. And I had happened to have done a Wabash seminar, I think the first year that Wabash was in existence. And again, I'd kept in touch with Wabash, I'd kept in touch with the people there. So when this position opened up, I had not only received word of it myself, but friends I knew through Wabash, like, hey, you should look at this, because they didn't want the person to move to Crawfordsville. And I knew I was not going to move. I can work from home, which has been great when I still have young kids. Let me come back to Wabash, because then about a year ago, I've done a lot of volunteer work. A lot of my scholarly work has been around issues of mental health and suicide and religious thought. And friends like, wow, that's a real upper. You're a real beach party person. But I've done volunteer work with NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and served on the board of our local affiliate. And about a year ago, they asked, would you be willing to step down from the board and do some part-time development work for us? So it's the mirror image of what I do for Wabash. With Wabash, we're giving away money. And with this development position that I can do at night or on the weekends, I'm asking for money. But I really enjoy that as well. So really, when I look back, yes, I worked as a professor in the classroom for the largest chunk of my time, but then since then, worked at the high school level, worked in a business setting, working now for Wabash, so in a nonprofit foundation, which is a re-granting body, and also then with NAMI in development. So when I think, the only time I really stop and think about what are the transferable skills that I'm using in my current position is when I'm kind of asked to, because I think, again, all of us have certain skills and interests and passions that have brought us to doctoral work and have led us to continue and ultimately conclude it. And they're second nature to us, and again, they're true of almost everybody you're with, so we don't see them. But I certainly think about both with Wabash and NAMI, I'm called upon to do a fair amount of research. And even it's that mindset, I think, of persistence with the research, that if we're not coming up with the answers we need, we start to develop ways to figure out who to go to, how to get them. And that is not as common a skill as you would think it might be. We're used to analyzing large amounts of data. An ability to grasp patterns, to think systemically. Communication, whether that's written or oral, they always say the number one fear for most people is public speaking. And for you, by the time you're done, you're going to have TA'd, you're going to have taught, you're going to have become more comfortable with public speaking. And that is just an enormous asset as you look at different career options. People who finish doctoral work are usually, they're very self-disciplined, they're self-motivated, curious, creative, organized, detail-oriented. You can't finish a big project like the dissertation without being essentially your own project manager, where you've learned to juggle all sorts of different demands on your time and resources and what you're collecting and then what you do with it. As I said, I have just found there to be, a lot of unforeseen benefits to working outside of academia, which isn't to say I wouldn't mind at some point, like I said, going back into the classroom, but it's allowed me a lot more flexibility and control of my own time. I've got a writing project I'm working on, and the only reason I'm not getting more done is because I'm choosing to do something like watch Netflix at night rather than work on it, and I don't want to get up early because I hate the mornings. But, I can work on it, I can do various other things. The salaries and benefits are far higher in a lot of other areas than academia. So it's made it a financially secure life for myself and my children. It's been a way that I can still live out my values and principles and sense of who I am, even, like I said, outside of the academy. I know that the University of Denver, ILIF, is doing a project right now around, say, people with doctorates in theology and religious studies who are working in museums, who are working at memorial sites, who are working perhaps in journalism, all sorts of different realms that don't immediately come to mind in connection with theology and religious studies, but that really benefit from having someone there with training in these areas to bring that perspective to their work. So, I don't know, I know you said to let people ask any question. With Wabash, we're fully funded by the Lilly Foundation, and they're quite generous. Now, they do have an overarching mission around supporting the flourishing of congregations in North America. So that shapes our work, that we work with faculty and now doctoral students in North America in religious studies and theological studies. 2/3 of our funding goes towards theological education and faculty and students there, and 1/3 to non-theological, so undergraduate institutions, doctoral programs. My sense is that that is shifting slowly to more 50-50, and especially because really more Americans and Canadians are coming in contact with theology and religious studies through their undergraduate programs than they are through graduate programs. So over time, we're seeing a shift with that. But we offer small grants up to $5,000, large, and as I said, I'll send you, I'm sorry I didn't think to bring that. I'll send you the flip books about this. Large grants up to $30,000. Now those would be restricted to once you are in a faculty position, but it can now be, it's changed over the last 2 years to be open to contingent faculty members as well, because that's the vast, vast majority of faculty in higher ed are people on 1 to 3 year term contracts where there is not going to be a tenure track line created. So there's the small grants, the large grants. Every now and then we have calls for proposals. So we just had one where it's around social justice, different pedagogies of social justice, and that will be, I don't think we're public on it yet, but so we just are getting ready to award that separate from the $30,000. We had one to doctoral programs that was $50,000 that we gave to 12 institutions. We also have peer cluster grants for faculty of minority status to work with one another around all sorts of different projects that are of interest and value to them. That is worth up to $7,500. We also have workshops. We have one set for early career, one set for mid-career, and there's a version offered for the theological schools and then a version offered for career colleges and universities. So that was the version I had done 20-some years ago, and I'm staffing one of those now. So we met last summer for a week, 4 faculty from around the country and Canada, 1 Wabash staff member, 14 participants, met at Wabash for a week, then a long weekend at Mustang Island off Corpus Christi in Texas, and then we'll be back a week this summer at Wabash. And Wabash now has nice posh accommodations that are like being in a hotel. When I went, we stayed in the dorms. And Wabash is an all-boys college, one of the few still remaining single-sex all-male colleges. And we were in their dorms. We had the communal bathrooms. There was no AC, and in Indiana summer, so we ought to bring our fans. But now when you come, we've got very nice setup for you. And I would say something that people talk about, they talk about hospitality in service of excellence, that we really strive to create a culture of abundance for doctoral students and for faculty to show your value. So there's a lot of downtime. There's a lot of playtime. We really encourage people, yes, I know you want to go back and finish working on this or that, but maybe you also want to go canoeing or dolphin watching in Texas. Maybe let's go to the art museum. Let's sit and have a drink and just relax and talk to one another as three-dimensional human beings. You are not disembodied intellects, and Wabash takes that very seriously. And so now we've extended that work to doctoral students. We're hosting seminars. We've been doing 2 a year. We've been in Chicago, Dallas, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco. We're working on finalizing for next year. I think one of the cities will be Atlanta. And it's open to doctoral students around the country, coming together for 2-night stay at a hotel and a day-and-a-half seminar, again with 2 faculty leaders and 1 Wabash staff person. To think, again, it's not about how do I lecture, how do I lead a small group discussion. It's more about what does it mean to teach? What does it mean for me to think of myself as a teacher? And when I understand myself as a teacher, again, how might that transfer to other avenues of professional life that may not be what I immediately came to mind as a classroom setting. It may be a very different setting, but you're still functioning as a teacher, and so that vocation to teach persists in many different arenas. And that comes with a stipend. Wabash is extremely generous in terms of we not only pay for your transportation, your lodging, your food, there's usually a stipend attached. So, you know, for the early career, mid-career participants, we pay them to come. And then there's a fellowship at the end. They will have a project related to their teaching, and that's another $5,000. But it's Lily's way and Wabash's way of showing the value of faculty of teachers across in these fields that often don't have very many resources and are often very pressed upon to serve a lot of needs of their universities and institutions.